if the greatest thing Kobe Bryant gave the world wasn't a championship, a scoring record, or even the Mamba mentality itself? What if his greatest gift was showing us what happens when a person becomes completely committed to growth? Because Kobe's mindset wasn't simply about working harder than everyone else. It was about how he thought, how he responded to failure, how he handled pressure, how he studied his weaknesses, and perhaps most importantly, how he viewed the process of becoming better each and every day. So in this video, let's look beyond the highlights and explore the psychology behind Kobe Bryant's mindset and how we can apply some of those principles to our own lives. Principle number 1 is to play the long game. One of the most fascinating things about Kobe's mindset developed when he was incredibly young. When Kobe was around 11 years old, he reportedly went through an entire summer league season without scoring a single point. Not one. And naturally, he was devastated. But Kobe's father gave him some incredibly important advice. Permission to fail. He reassured Kobe that whether he scored 0 points or 60, he would still love him the same. And Kobe later explained that this gave him the confidence to go out and fail and not have that fear of failure hanging over him. But then came the important part. Kobe didn't use failure as an excuse, he used it as information. He went back to work, he focused on fundamentals, he practiced consistently, he improved over time. And within a few years, he had transformed himself into one of the best young players in his area. Psychologically, that's a powerful lesson. Failure becomes much less threatening when you stop viewing it as a verdict on who you are. Instead of saying, I failed, therefore I'm a failure, you can say, I failed, therefore I have information. That's a completely different mindset. Kobe understood the long game. He wasn't obsessed with being better than somebody today. He wanted to become better than he was yesterday and eventually become the person capable of reaching his ultimate goal. That's something we can all apply to our lives. Maybe you're building a career, maybe you're building a business, maybe you're trying to improve your relationships, maybe you're pursuing a creative dream, maybe you're struggling through a season of life that doesn't look anything like you imagined. Don't judge the entire journey based on one bad chapter. Play the long game. Now, let's talk about principle 2, how to turn weaknesses into strengths. Another defining characteristic of Kobe was his willingness to confront what he wasn't good at. Most people naturally gravitate toward their strengths. If you're good at something, you want to continue to do it. It feels good. It reinforces your confidence. But Kobe often did the opposite. He deliberately worked on his weaknesses. If there was a part of his game that wasn't developed, he attacked it. Left hand, footwork, post moves, shooting, angles, conditioning, film study. He wanted fewer holes in his game. And psychologically, this represents something important. Self-awareness without self-condemnation. There's a difference between admitting I'm not good at this and saying I'm capable of becoming good at this. Kobe lived in the space between those two statements. He could acknowledge a weakness without allowing that weakness to define him. That's incredibly powerful, outside of sports as well. Maybe you're not a great communicator. Maybe you're uncomfortable with failure. Maybe you're your own worst critic. Maybe you procrastinate. Maybe you struggle with confidence. Maybe you have a habit that keeps holding you back. The Mamba mentality doesn't tell you to pretend that weakness doesn't exist. It asks you to look directly at it, then work on it. Now, principle 3, preparation creates confidence. We often think confidence comes first. Kobe's mindset suggests something different. Sometimes confidence is the result of preparation. Kobe understood that when you have put in the repetitions, studied the situation, anticipated the possibilities, and prepared yourself physically and mentally, you don't have to rely entirely on emotion when pressure arrives. You can rely on preparation. Think about an exam. If you didn't study, anxiety makes sense. But if you studied for weeks, practiced the material, and walked into the room prepared, you have something to fall back on. The same principle applies to life. You can't control everything that happens to you, but you can control whether you prepared for what you can anticipate. Kobe studied opponents, he studied film, he studied himself. He looked for patterns, he wanted to understand why something worked and why it didn't. That curiosity was a huge part of his psychology. He didn't simply want to know what happened, he wanted to know the why behind it. And that leads to the 4th principle. Principle 4, Curiosity is a superpower. Kobe was relentlessly curious. He asked questions. He studied great players. He learned from coaches. He watched a ton of film. He sought mentors. He wasn't afraid of looking foolish because he was more concerned with becoming better. That's an important psychological shift. Sometimes our ego prevents our own growth. We don't ask the question because we're afraid that somebody will think that we should already know the answer. We don't try something new because we don't want to look bad. We don't ask for help because we think we should be able to figure everything out on our own. Kobe essentially flipped that equation. He was willing to risk embarrassment today to gain knowledge that could make him better tomorrow. Imagine what would happen if you adopted that mindset. Instead of asking, what will people think of me? You started asking, what can I learn from this? Kobe wasn't afraid to go up to Michael Jordan and ask him about his post-up moves. He wasn't afraid to call Michael Jordan in 2007 and ask him who his trainer was because Kobe's knees were starting to fail him. Kobe went out of his way to learn and grow and ask himself, what am I missing? What do I need to work on? That's the psychology of growth. Now, principle 5, focus on what you can control. Kobe Bryant's career was filled with circumstances he couldn't control. Injuries, teammates, coaches, opponents, referees, media criticism, missed shots, losses, but he repeatedly returned to preparation and execution. That's one of the healthiest lessons we can take from his mindset. You cannot control the outcome of every situation. You cannot control what another person thinks. You cannot control whether someone chooses you. You cannot control whether an opportunity works out. You cannot control yesterday, but you can control what you do today. You can control your effort, your preparation, your response, your attitude, your next decision. And sometimes that's where peace begins. Because when we spend all of our mental energy trying to control things that aren't ours to control, anxiety grows. But when we redirect that energy toward what is within our control, we regain agency. Kobe didn't guarantee himself success every night. He guaranteed himself preparation. He guaranteed that he would show up. And that's a profound difference. Now, principle 6, embrace the process. Perhaps the biggest misconception about the Mamba mentality is that it means being obsessed with winning. But Kobe's philosophy evolved around more than winning. It became about mastery, about loving the process, about becoming fascinated with the smallest details. He could spend hours working on something most people would consider insignificant because he understood something. Greatness is usually hidden inside the details that ordinary people overlook. The 10th repetition, the extra film session, the uncomfortable conversation, the boring fundamentals, the decision to show up when you're not motivated. That's where transformation happens. We live in a culture obsessed with results. How many followers? How much money? How many wins? How quickly can I succeed? But growth doesn't work on our preferred timeline. Sometimes you work for months before anybody notices. Sometimes you practice for years before the breakthrough comes. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. That's why the process matters, because if your identity depends entirely on the outcome, every setback will threaten your identity. But if your identity is built around becoming better, then even setbacks can become part of the journey. The real Mamba mentality is this. Kobe Bryant was obviously an extraordinary athlete, but you don't have to be a professional athlete to learn from his psychology. You don't need to wake up at an insane hour like Kobe did. You don't need to train until exhaustion like Kobe did, and you certainly don't need to copy every aspect of Kobe's life. Kobe was a once-in-a-lifetime athlete. The lesson isn't to become Kobe Bryant. The lesson is to become the best version of yourself. Study yourself. Know your weaknesses. Work on them. Prepare. Stay curious. Embrace failure. Focus on what you can control. And most importantly, play the long game. Because your life isn't determined by one failure. It's not determined by one rejection. It's not determined by one bad year. It's determined by what you do next. Kobe once described his approach as having no fear of trying something new because he kept the long game in mind. He understood that missing shots and looking bad could be the price of adding another tool to his game. And that's a part of Kobe's mindset that I think we should remember. Not perfection, not invincibility, not the idea that you should never struggle, but the willingness to keep learning, to keep adapting, to keep showing up, to keep becoming. Because greatness isn't something that happens to you, it's something you build. One decision, one repetition, one failure, one lesson, one day at a time. That's the psychology behind Kobe Bryant. That's the Mamba mentality. And that's a mindset that can extend far beyond the basketball court. This video was done to honor 8/24 Kobe Bryant Day. The Mamba mentality forever. And the Mamba mentality is something you can apply to each and every day of your life in every aspect of your life. Rest in peace, Kobe. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for the lessons.